I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
And here we go. Right out of the gate, we're witnessing the opening moves of what I call the Peterson Shuffle, a masterclass in intellectual evasion that would make a used car salesman blush. The interviewer's already setting up the problem that's about to unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. Dawkins has asked direct questions, and Peterson hasn't given direct answers. This isn't rocket science, folks. When someone asks you if you believe in the virgin birth, there are exactly 3 honest responses: yes, no, or I don't know. But Peterson? He's about to give us a master's thesis on why the question itself is fundamentally flawed. Notice how the interviewer already knows what's coming. He's trying to preemptively cut off Peterson's escape routes by pointing out that even saying, I don't know, would be an actual answer. This is like having to explain to someone that maybe is still a response to a yes or no question. The fact that this clarification is necessary tells you everything you need to know about what we're dealing with here. We're not about to witness a philosophical discussion. We're about to watch an intellectual magician trying to make a simple question disappear in a cloud of academic smoke.
Okay. And Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question. But is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know how to, that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. This is Peterson's signature move, the intellectual inadequacy defense. He's not avoiding the question because he doesn't want to answer it. He's avoiding it because he's too intellectually humble to fully grasp its profound complexity. It's like a mechanic telling you he can't diagnose your car because the mysteries of internal combustion are too vast for his mortal mind to comprehend. Let's break down what just happened here. Peterson was asked about virgin birth and immediately pivoted to resurrection. That's not absent-mindedness, that's strategic deflection. He's lumping together every miraculous claim in Christianity so he can treat them as one giant, incomprehensible mystery rather than addressing specific, answerable questions. It's the intellectual equivalent of responding to, "Did you eat my sandwich?" with the nature of consumption and ownership in human society is endlessly complex. And notice the language, elements of the text that I don't know how to use. Use for what? He's treating the Bible like a piece of software he hasn't figured out how to operate. The question isn't about textual analysis or hermeneutics, it's about whether he personally believes a specific claim. But Peterson's already retreated into the safe space of academic analysis, where he can discuss the text without ever having to commit to believing or disbelieving its content. The phrase, "my knowledge just ends," is particularly insidious. It sounds humble, but it's actually an intellectual power play. Peterson's positioning himself as someone who's ventured so far into the depths of knowledge that he's reached the very boundaries of human understanding. Most of us peasants are stuck arguing about surface-level factual claims, but Peterson has ascended to a realm where such questions become meaningless. It's humility theater, a performance of intellectual modesty that's actually profoundly arrogant.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise.
And there it is, Peterson's favorite magic trick. Can't answer whether you believe in virgin birth? Let's talk about the fall of Rome. This is deflection raised to an art form. He's essentially saying, I don't know if the specific claims of Christianity are true, but look at what Christianity accomplished. It's like being asked if you believe in astrology and responding with a lecture about how astrology influenced Renaissance art. This move is particularly clever because it allows Peterson to acknowledge Christianity's historical significance without committing to the truth of its supernatural claims. He's found a way to be pro-Christian without being Christian. He can celebrate Christianity's cultural impact while remaining agnostic about its actual truth claims. It's having your intellectual cake and eating it too. But let's think about what this argument actually proves. The fact that a story is historically influential doesn't tell us anything about its factual accuracy. The Greek myths were incredibly influential in Western culture. They shaped literature, art, and philosophy for millennia. Does that mean Zeus actually existed? The influence of an idea and the truth of an idea are completely separate questions, but Peterson consistently conflates them because it allows him to sound Christian without actually being Christian. This is Peterson's core strategy throughout this entire exchange: substitute historical significance for truth value, cultural impact for factual accuracy, social utility for literal belief. He's treating Christianity like a successful brand rather than a set of truth claims that demand a response.
So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Chris-
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions, what would you say? They don't strike me as, they're not getting to the point.
Hold on just a damn minute. Now Peterson's got a specific answer. It's a mistranslation. But immediately after providing this seemingly factual response, he dismisses the entire line of questioning as missing the point. So which is it, Jordan? Is it a mistranslation, a factual claim, or is the factual question irrelevant, a philosophical claim? You can't have it both ways. This is Peterson's intellectual shell game in action. When pressed for specifics, he can produce them. Apparently, he knows enough about biblical scholarship to make claims about translation errors. But the moment he's given a specific answer, he retreats behind the "that's not the real question" defense. It's like a witness who suddenly develops detailed knowledge when it's convenient but claims ignorance when it's not. The phrase "these sorts of questions" is particularly telling. Peterson's not just dismissing this specific question about virgin birth, he's dismissing an entire category of questions about factual accuracy. He's essentially saying that asking whether religious claims are literally true is the wrong type of question entirely. But if factual accuracy isn't important, why did he just make a factual claim about mistranslation? The contradiction is glaring. And what does "not getting to the point" even mean here? The point of what? The interviewer and Dawkins have made their point crystal clear. They want to know what Peterson actually believes about specific Christian claims. Peterson's the one who keeps changing the subject. He's like someone who shows up to a math test and complains that the questions are too focused on mathematics.
I know
The
that. I
story
know
has
you
a
think
purpose.
that. Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that. And I know that your question is more than valid, but it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned. And it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story.
Here comes the philosophical fog machine. Peterson's retreating into his favorite conceptual framework, the idea that humans understand reality through narratives. This sounds profound until you realize it's completely irrelevant to the question at hand. Yes, humans think in stories. So what? That doesn't tell us whether any particular story is factually accurate. This is Peterson's standard operating procedure. When asked about specifics, zoom out to meta-level abstractions. Can't answer whether Jesus was born of a virgin? Let's discuss the narrative structure of human cognition. It's like being asked if you paid your taxes and responding with a dissertation on the social construction of civic obligation. But even if we accept Peterson's premise that we see the world through stories, that raises an obvious follow-up question: which stories are true and which are false? Even if reality is narratively structured, we still need criteria for distinguishing between accurate and inaccurate narratives. Peterson's framework doesn't eliminate the need for factual verification. It makes it more urgent. Notice how Peterson presents this as a remarkable discovery that's emerged probably in the last 60 or 60 years in multiple disciplines. This is classic academic intimidation. He's implying that anyone who doesn't appreciate the profound complexity of narrative cognition is simply behind the times. But the idea that humans think in stories isn't particularly new or controversial. What's new is using this obvious fact as a way to avoid answering straightforward questions about what you believe.
And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation.
Beautiful deflection technique here. Asked about virgin birth, Peterson's now discussing the pattern of Cain and its relationship to cultural devastation. This is intellectual whiplash. We've gone from a specific biological question to abstract discussions of archetypal patterns and their civilizational consequences. It's like asking someone if they believe in ghosts and getting a lecture on medieval European mortality patterns. But let's examine what Peterson's actually claiming here. He's suggesting that some narratives lead to life abundant, while others lead to bloody devastation. Fine. But that's a claim about the practical consequences of belief systems, not their truth value. A false story can have positive consequences, and a true story can have negative ones. Peterson's conflating utility with accuracy, again. This is where Peterson's intellectual sleight of hand becomes most obvious. He's taking the very reasonable observation that some belief systems have better outcomes than others and using it to sidestep questions about whether those belief systems are actually true. But beneficial and factual are different categories. Believing that eating vegetables is good for you has positive health outcomes, but that doesn't tell us whether vegetables are actually nutritious. We need empirical evidence for that. Peterson's treating truth claims like consumer products. He's more interested in whether they work, produce desired outcomes, than whether they're accurate, correspond to reality. But this pragmatic approach to truth creates a fundamental problem. How do you evaluate whether something works without first establishing what's actually happening?
And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
And now we're talking about women's rights. Asked about virgin birth, Peterson has somehow maneuvered the conversation to gender equality. This isn't just deflection, it's intellectual chaos. He's throwing out random ethical questions to demonstrate that factual claims and moral claims are different categories. But nobody disputed that. The question was about his personal beliefs regarding a specific factual claim, not about the relationship between facts and values in general. This is Peterson's "look, a squirrel" moment. He's hoping that by raising a complex ethical question, everyone will forget that he was asked a simple factual question. But even if we accept his point that moral questions can't be answered purely through empirical facts, that doesn't mean factual questions can't be answered factually. Whether women should be treated equally is indeed a complex moral question. Whether Jesus had a biological father is a straightforward empirical question. Peterson's creating a false equivalence between two completely different types of questions. He's essentially arguing that because some questions are complex and multifaceted, all questions are complex and multifaceted. But that's obviously false. Some questions are genuinely difficult to answer, and others are straightforward. The difficulty of determining gender equality doesn't make every question equally difficult. This is also a perfect example of Peterson's tendency to intellectualize himself out of common sense positions. Most reasonable people would say that women should be treated equally because they're human beings with equal dignity and worth. But Peterson needs to turn this into a complex epistemological puzzle about the relationship between facts and values. He can't just take a moral position, he has to problematize the very concept of taking moral positions.
It's a moral question, and
I know, that's exactly.
I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? and you won't answer it.
Well,
It's a
Jesus
different
had an
kind of
earthly
question.
father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So
That's
he wasn't born of a virgin then? So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value, it's a simple fact.
Finally, the interviewer calls Peterson out with surgical precision. It's not a value. It's a simple fact. This is the moment of truth. The interviewer has cut through all of Peterson's philosophical obfuscation and brought him back to the basic question. Did sperm meet egg or not? This isn't a complex philosophical puzzle about the relationship between facts and values. This is basic biology. Peterson's response reveals the fundamental weakness in his entire approach. He claims he doesn't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy, but the question isn't asking him to mediate anything. It's asking him what he believes about a specific factual claim. The fact-value distinction is completely irrelevant here because nobody's asking about values, they're asking about facts. This is where Peterson's philosophical sophistication becomes a liability rather than an asset. He's so invested in complex theoretical frameworks that he can't engage with simple, direct questions. It's like someone who's studied advanced mathematics but can't do basic arithmetic because they're too busy thinking about number theory. The interviewer's follow-up is devastating. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. This is about as direct as human language allows. There's no room for interpretation, no space for philosophical maneuvering, no opportunity for conceptual framework switching. It's a binary question that demands a binary answer.
I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth.
The interviewer is doing God's work here. He's trying to drag Peterson back to earth by clarifying the type of truth that's being discussed. This is crucial because Peterson consistently switches between different concepts of truth when it's convenient. When pressed for factual answers, he talks about mythological truth. When discussing mythological significance, he makes factual claims. The interviewer is trying to pin him down to one category, scientific truth. This clarification is important because it reveals Peterson's core evasion strategy. He's not actually disagreeing with the question, he's disagreeing with the type of answer that's being requested. He wants to discuss symbolic truth, archetypal truth, pragmatic truth, narrative truth, anything except straightforward factual truth. But the interviewer won't let him escape into these alternative frameworks. Notice how the interviewer acknowledges Peterson's broader point about textual interpretation while still insisting on the factual question, even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events. This is intellectually generous. He's giving Peterson credit for his hermeneutical sophistication while still demanding an answer to the basic question. But Peterson can't take yes for an answer. Even when given room to maintain his complex interpretive framework, he still can't provide a simple factual response. This suggests that his evasiveness isn't really about protecting the deeper significance of religious texts, it's about avoiding any position that could be definitively challenged or refuted.
That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Inappropriate. Let that word sink in. Peterson thinks it's inappropriate to ask someone what they believe about their own religious commitments. This is like a politician calling it inappropriate to ask about their voting record, or a doctor calling it inappropriate to ask about their medical opinions. The question isn't inappropriate. Peterson's evasiveness is inappropriate. But notice the framing here. Peterson's treating the question as an attack on the entire deep mythological enterprise. This is classic victimization rhetoric. He's not being asked to defend all of mythology. He's being asked about his personal beliefs regarding one specific claim. But by inflating the stakes, he can make the questioner seem like an aggressor rather than someone seeking clarification. This is also revealing about Peterson's psychology. He apparently can't separate his personal beliefs from his intellectual framework. A question about what he believes becomes an attack on his entire worldview. This suggests a level of ego investment that makes honest intellectual engagement impossible. He's not defending Christianity or mythology. He's defending his identity as someone who has profound insights into Christianity and mythology. The phrase deep mythological enterprise is particularly telling. Peterson's not talking about mythology as a subject of study. He's talking about it as an enterprise, a project, a mission. He's not just analyzing religious narratives, he's promoting them. But he can't admit this promotional aspect because it would reveal that his supposedly objective analysis is actually advocacy.
Suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
This is the moment that exposes Peterson's entire game. When the interviewer creates a hypothetical scenario where the question is being asked by friendly Christians in a casual dinner setting, Peterson immediately admits he'd just say, I don't know. So the information was there all along. The simple, honest answer was available the entire time. The preceding 20 minutes of philosophical gymnastics were completely unnecessary. This reveals that Peterson's evasiveness isn't about the complexity of the question, it's about the context in which it's being asked. He can give a straight answer when he feels safe, but he can't give a straight answer when he feels challenged. This isn't intellectual honesty, it's social calculation. He's not protecting the integrity of religious discourse, he's protecting his reputation as someone who has deep insights into religious discourse. The contrast is stark and damning. In a friendly environment with fellow believers, Peterson can be direct and honest. In a challenging environment with skeptics, he becomes evasive and obfuscatory. This suggests that his philosophical complexity is primarily defensive rather than genuinely exploratory. He's not thinking deeply about these questions, he's avoiding them while appearing to think deeply about them. But the interviewer won't let him escape. I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances. This is the kill shot. The interviewer has demonstrated that Peterson is capable of direct answers but chooses not to give them. The struggle isn't intellectual, it's psychological and strategic.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature.
And here comes the academic superiority complex in full flower. Peterson's essentially saying, you people wouldn't understand because you haven't read what I've read. This is classic credentialism, using expertise as a shield against simple questions rather than a tool for providing better answers. But let's examine this claim more closely. Peterson knows the literature on the history of religious ideas. Fine. How does that prevent him from stating his personal beliefs about specific religious claims? If anything, extensive knowledge should make him more capable of giving nuanced, informed answers, not less capable of giving any answers at all. Peterson's treating his expertise like a curse rather than an asset. He's claiming that the more he knows about religion, the less able he is to take positions on religious questions. But this is backwards. Knowledge should clarify rather than obscure. Understanding the complexity of religious history should help him articulate his own position within that complexity, not prevent him from having any position at all. The comparison to Dawkins is particularly revealing. Peterson suggesting that he and Dawkins are engaged in the same type of intellectual battle that religious ideas have been fighting for millennia. But Dawkins is clear about his positions. He's an atheist who thinks religious claims are false. Peterson's the one who's unclear about his positions. He's trying to claim the mantle of deep intellectual engagement while actually demonstrating intellectual cowardice.
And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value-predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. There's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact.
Peterson's final retreat into meta-epistemological complexity. He's claiming that the relationship between facts and values is so poorly understood that we can't even properly ask factual questions. This is like saying we can't do mathematics because we haven't solved all the problems in the philosophy of mathematics. But notice the self-contradiction here. Peterson claims there's no evidence whatsoever for something, then immediately calls this lack of evidence a fact. If we can't orient ourselves based on facts, how can he present factual claims about our inability to orient ourselves based on facts? He's using the very type of reasoning he claims is impossible. This is Peterson's nuclear option. When all else fails, question the foundations of rational discourse itself. If factual questions are problematic in principle, then his inability to answer factual questions becomes a virtue rather than a failing. He's not being evasive, he's being epistemologically sophisticated. He's not avoiding difficult questions, he's transcending the limited framework in which such questions make sense. But this strategy backfires because it undermines Peterson's entire intellectual project. If we can't make factual claims, then Peterson can't make claims about psychology, mythology, religion, politics, or anything else. His own books and lectures become impossible to evaluate. He's sawed off the branch he's sitting on.
And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed was not a philosophical discussion. It was not an intellectual exploration of complex religious questions. It was not a thoughtful examination of the relationship between faith and reason. What we witnessed was an 11-minute masterclass in intellectual cowardice, dressed up in academic robes and presented as profound wisdom. Let me be crystal clear about what happened here. Jordan Peterson was asked one simple question: do you believe Jesus was born of a virgin? And spent 11 minutes doing everything in his power to avoid answering it. This wasn't complexity, it was evasion. This wasn't depth, it was deflection. This wasn't intellectual honesty, it was sophisticated dishonesty. Peterson's entire performance can be broken down into a series of predictable moves, each designed to avoid taking any position that could be challenged, criticized, or proven wrong. When asked about virgin birth, he talks about resurrection. When pressed about resurrection, he talks about Rome. When challenged about Rome, he talks about narrative structures. When cornered about narrative structures, he talks about the fact-value distinction. When forced to confront the fact-value distinction, he talks about translation errors. When caught making factual claims about translation, he dismisses factual questions as inappropriate. When shown that the questions aren't inappropriate, he retreats into claims about his superior knowledge. When challenged about his superior knowledge, he questions the foundations of knowledge itself. This isn't thinking, it's intellectual performance art. Peterson has turned the avoidance of clear positions into a career. He's discovered that you can sound profound by making simple things complicated, and that you can avoid being wrong by never being specific enough to be wrong about anything. But let's examine what this reveals about Peterson's character and intellectual integrity. First, it reveals that he's fundamentally dishonest about his own beliefs. The dinner party hypothetical proved that Peterson is capable of direct answers when he feels safe, but incapable of direct answers when he feels challenged. This means his evasiveness isn't about intellectual complexity, it's about social and professional calculation. Second, it reveals that Peterson treats his audience as marks rather than participants in genuine dialogue. He's not trying to help people understand complex issues, he's trying to impress people with his ability to make issues seem complex. He's not educating, he's performing. His goal isn't clarity, it's the appearance of profundity. Third, it reveals that Peterson has no respect for the basic norms of rational discourse. When someone asks you a direct question, the appropriate response is to try to answer it directly. If you can't answer it, you explain why you can't answer it. If you need to qualify your answer, you give the qualified answer. What you don't do is spend 11 minutes explaining why the question shouldn't have been asked in the first place. Fourth, it reveals that Peterson's intellectual framework is fundamentally defensive rather than exploratory. He's not using his knowledge to engage with difficult questions, he's using his knowledge to avoid difficult questions. He's not thinking his way into clarity, he's thinking his way into obscurity. His complexity serves no purpose except to protect him from having to take positions that could be challenged. But the most damning thing about Peterson's performance is how it compares to Dawkins' straightforward honesty. When Dawkins is asked about his beliefs, he answers clearly. He's an atheist who thinks religious claims are false, but he acknowledges that science has philosophical foundations and that Christianity may have played a historical role in the development of science. Dawkins takes positions, defends them with evidence, and admits uncertainty where appropriate. This is what intellectual honesty looks like. Peterson, by contrast, can't even tell us whether he believes in virgin birth. He can discuss the historical significance of the belief, analyze its archetypal meaning, explore its narrative function, and pontificate about its cultural impact. But he can't tell us whether he thinks it actually happened. This isn't sophistication, it's intellectual paralysis. And what's the cost of this intellectual paralysis? Peterson has built a massive following of people who think his evasiveness represents deep thinking. They've learned to mistake complexity for wisdom, verbosity for insight, and confusion for profundity. They've been trained to see Peterson's inability to take clear positions as evidence of his intellectual superiority rather than evidence of his intellectual cowardice. But perhaps most importantly, Peterson's approach corrupts the entire concept of expertise. Expertise should make you better at answering questions in your field, not worse at it. A psychology professor should be better than average at discussing human behavior, not less capable of taking positions on psychological questions. A religious studies expert should be better than average at articulating positions on religious issues, not less capable of saying what they believe about religious claims. Peterson has inverted the relationship between knowledge and clarity. In his world, the more you know, the less you can say. The deeper you think, the less you can conclude. The more expert you become, the less capable you are of helping others understand the subjects you've studied. This is a complete perversion of what intellectual authority should represent. The tragedy is that Peterson clearly does know a lot about psychology, mythology, and religious history. He could contribute meaningfully to public understanding of these topics. But he's chosen instead to use his knowledge as a way of avoiding rather than engaging with the difficult questions these subjects raise. He's become an intellectual performer rather than an intellectual contributor. What we witnessed in this transcript wasn't a man wrestling with profound mysteries. It was a man who's so afraid of being wrong that he'd rather be incomprehensible than incorrect. It was a man who's so invested in appearing wise that he's forgotten how to be honest. It was a man who's so committed to his image as a deep thinker that he's lost the ability to think clearly. This is what happens when intellectual pride replaces intellectual integrity. This is what happens when the appearance of wisdom becomes more important than the pursuit of truth. This is what happens when someone becomes so invested in their reputation as a profound thinker that they forget the basic purpose of thinking, to understand reality and help others understand it too. Jordan Peterson spent 11 minutes explaining why he couldn't answer a simple question about his own beliefs. That's not philosophy, that's pathology. That's not depth, that's evasion. That's not wisdom, that's sophisticated cowardice. And if this is what passes for intellectual discourse in our culture, then we're in deeper trouble than we thought. The emperor has no clothes. The expert has no answers. The profound thinker has no thoughts. What Peterson has is an elaborate system for avoiding thoughts while appearing to think, for evading questions while appearing to engage with them, for saying nothing while appearing to say everything. That's not intellectual achievement, that's intellectual fraud. And it's time we called it what it is.